that is really close to my heart is actually, observing people. Because I think some of my greatest learnings have actually come from just observing people and really trying to understand why they do what they do. And therefore, we thought that, when we are spending so much time talking about the future of work and future of learning, we have to pause at some point to also think, what is the future of workplaces then? What kind of organizations do we have to build? What kind of cultures do we have to build? If you're really talking about building all this talent and skill and, where are they going to work? And what kind of environments are they going to work? Because it isn't really just a cubicle, right? I'm going to invite the panelists on stage. And let me start with one of the first panelists here. So the story behind him is, since 1998, he has spent time working closely with the sharks of the corporate sector, and has spent a lot of time working with some of the biggest brands that you would have possibly heard of. He is the founder and managing director of ODA, which stands for Organization Development Alternatives. He has also written a book called Coaching, the Art of Developing Leaders. Please welcome a former primary school teacher, and today, a leader who is helping organizations build thriving environments, Santosh Babu. Santosh, I want to get us started a little bit before I call everyone else. What does it feel like to be in a room that's really filled with social enterprises, non-profit sectors, leaders of various institutions? How does it feel to be on this side?
I was actually feeling blank because of late night football and travels. But it's like homecoming because after the primary school teacher stint, I worked 5 years with non-profits. I worked with an organization called World Wildlife Fund, where I headed their learning and education. And as a part of that, worked with a lot of grassroots level organizations.
Awesome.
So it's like homecoming back.
Great. Welcome back home then. I will move on to introduce our next panelist, and that's Manisha Gupta. She's the founder and director of Startup, 19 years in the social sector. She has formerly led Ashoka Innovators for Public and helps organizations build strategic plans, whether you are a seed venture or a scale venture. She also closely works and mentors Quest Alliance. She has authored 2 books. One is called Childline Calling, and the other one is called Opening Doors. Please welcome Manisha Gupta. And today you are on the panel, and yesterday you were moderating a panel. And you actually work very closely with Quest Alliance. What are your top thoughts right now as you sit here?
Top of mind thought, and especially having worked with Quest Alliance for the last few months, is this is what it's all about. The energy, the play, the passion, and I also saw how you very cleverly and very beautifully build in technology. The Kahoot.in was so exciting. So yeah, so this is what it's all about. So it's like so real.
Awesome, great. Thank you for being here. Our next panelist has been in India for the last, I think, 5 days. And what a lot of you don't know, and perhaps some of you do know this, because he was here running a 3-day workshop on designing safe learning spaces, facilitating safe learning spaces, all the way from Denmark, from Chaos Pilot, David Huell. Please welcome David. David, your top highlight from the 3-day workshop that you facilitated just before the summit started.
The top highlight? I think the top highlight is actually quite the same highlight as I have being here yesterday and today. I didn't really know what to expect coming to India. Like, what were you doing? What were your thoughts on education and development? And I just met so many like-minded people and so many pioneers and change makers So I got really proud. Manisha was a part of the workshop. I got really proud of you and the rest of the team and the people I've met here and the stories I've heard. I mean, you're the heroes of India. And I believe, like Kiran said, you have the potential to create the children and your employees, the future superheroes of India. So thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm really, really happy for that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming all the way. So the next person really does not need an introduction, because we've really engaged with LinkedIn. It's really just part of our life now. More importantly, a lot of us use LinkedIn for learning, actually. And that's why Kapila Sebastian is with us today. She is a learning consultant and has very specifically worked on organizational development and e-learning. Please welcome Kapila. So, Kapila, what is the one thing that you look for when you look at people's LinkedIn profiles? I'm curious.
I know the one thing we ask for when anybody joins LinkedIn, what's not on your profile today? So that's something you want to, go back and think about. Through LinkedIn accounts, profiles, that's what people know about as jobs. What we are trying to create is stories for folks. I love stories. I'm all about storytelling. I'm also about creating stories in people's lives. Every one of us has it, right? But LinkedIn is also about that. Your account is about telling that story to the rest of the world. And whether you realize it or not, people are taking a peek and they're reading. So that's what it is.
Great. So it's not just a profile, it's a story. Great. Over the last 2 days, we spoke extensively about the future of work and learning. We very specifically looked at the voice of the industry here. We looked at young people and trainers who are actually practitioners of learnability. All of you, between yourselves, have over 200 years of experience of building organizations, if I just club it together between the 4 of them. So that's 200 years of experience sitting right here, and that's a lot of wisdom. So wanted to tap into that a little bit and ask you, how do organizations keep learning, and how do they stay relevant? So let's start with Santosh, and then we move over this side.
How do organizations keep learning? I think experiences teach most is a politically correct answer.
Right.
How do organizations keep learning now is when somebody decide this is what they need to learn, and most of the time that has no connection with what they should be learning. So you will see these 2 tracks happening. One side there is a learning calendar and X number of programs, and I being in this field, I get calls saying that, what's a new fantastic program that you can tell me which I can offer? So I usually ask this question, what is it something that you are being challenged with for which you need to use learning? We keep hearing about the learning organization, but you asked me, I've worked with around 300 organizations, that concept of learning organization hasn't really got into the arteries and veins of organization as an identity. So there are 2 parallel tracks. Organizations do learn with their experiences, but they fail miserably to code it. And organizations do run a parallel track of learning and development, which most of the time don't have a connect to what they're going through. So I don't have a very, very good picture and an answer of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the process of learning really as a parallel track, but not really seeping through the arteries and veins of the organization.
That's right.
Great point, Anisha.
Okay, actually, I'm going to develop on that track of thinking. So, I work with social enterprises, I work with nonprofits. And by desire and by purpose, social entrepreneurs and nonprofits jump into the most complex and chaotic scenarios, knowing fully well that they're jumping into those scenarios, right? And they care deeply about learning. But let's see what happens in those organizations. At one level, at the level of the individual, the individual, regardless of age, regardless of designation, has jumped in, plunged, is learning every day, but not just learning from the mind, but learning from the body, from the head, heart, hands, feelings, intuitions, emotions. End of the day, end of the week, end of the month. Is that learning, really being processed as learning, or we are just so busy doing that, there's all organizations are learning organizations, but there's a huge poverty of learning because we don't call it out as learning. We don't stop to realize, my heart broke and that was a learning. I almost cried because I was shunned out of the community and that was learning. And how do we really process that at an individual level is something that actually we are never taught, right? At another level, what really happens is, all the learnings that, that's happening in, let's say, 100-member team, even if there's one insight that comes out from there, at an organization level, are these individual, everyday, daily learnings, shoring up into an organization-wide insight, right? So I'm not sure if that really happens. I haven't seen a lot of that happening, and that's primarily because I'm going to tie that back to Santosh's point. As we are change-making organizations, but are we calling ourselves learning organizations? That's one thing. The second thing that I want to share is that every time we go into organizations, they say, yeah, we care deeply about learning, and we really do believe them. But what are they learning? They care deeply about technical learning, about technical expertise, about managing, about sustainability. But learning is different from knowledge, and that's something that Punya sort of pointed out to us yesterday too. You're in this beautiful theater of learning, you're in these complex scenarios. But are we learning how to pull out insights, Are we learning how to sort of really look at the place where my technical knowledge is speaking to an experience and I'm pulling out something, boom, from there. So, that would make a learning organization. I'm not so sure if that happens.
Sure. And I think that holds true for almost all of us. When we think about learning, we often think about, doing. So you're really doing a workshop, you're really doing a course, you're always doing, but is learning always doing something? I think that's a good question to think about. Yeah.
We do these exercises with organizations where we force them in a scenario where you have to be a doer, an instructor, and an observer. And across the 9 years that we've done this exercise, every time people have been in a place of observer, they've really actually told us they felt they had no role. Sure. So, I think we just love doing and really don't call out observation and reflection.
Sure. David.
Okay, so how many of you are some sort of leaders in organizations? Raise your hand. So quite a few leaders. How many of you are employees in some sort of organization? Please raise your hand. Okay, also quite a bunch. How many of you have within the last week found yourself either as a leader or as an employee in a conversation about your organizational processes, both engaging a leader and an employee? Raise your hand. Also quite some hands, very good. How many of you have taken a shower within the last week? Please raise your hand. A bit more hands. There were actually quite a lot didn't. Okay. Well, I'm surprised. But it seems you're quite well on personal hygiene. I saw a bit fewer hands when it comes to organizational hygiene. So the concept of us ensuring that we actually have a consistent flow of conversations on our organizational processes in the way we interact within our organizations. So what I see in the work that I do is that we usually lack that language. We have a shared understanding among us that it's quite nice to take a shower before you go to work. And dressing up in some sort of clean clothes will help you actually deliver the work that you do. But we all know that the core of the work we do is not connected to what we wear or if we stink or not. But we are not able to deliver that work if we stink and if we don't wear clean clothes. Because we know from history you need to be some sort of presentable and you need to be close to other people. So we've established a logic in this field. What we haven't established is that when we talk about organizations, we haven't established a shared understanding that organizational learning and a trustful space where we can talk about this, how do we run this organization, both among leaders and with the employees, the whole organization. We lack that language and that shared logic that is needed. And I want to point to you that are the leaders here, because it takes a certain commitment to ensure that we can have that conversation. And if you don't, it's just a matter of time to ask yourself, when will my organization close? All organizations are closing. It's just a matter of time. But if you want to ensure that you actually have a place in this world and will not just maintain the work that you do, but also renew the work that you do and become a changing organization that can change the world and lives of other people, then you also need to ensure a thriving environment for your employees and for yourself. So how do you create that space? And I think it starts by setting that intention and say, we want to prioritize that. And we can't do it alone. Kieran, you said beautifully, the children, they want to be included in the learning journey. When we look at organizations, it's the same thing for employees. Don't talk about me without me. We want to be a part of that conversation. And we want the frames so low practically. We want to have like meetings, and we want curious leaders that ask us questions, and we want safe environments where we can raise what's dear to our hearts and what's in the way of us delivering the work and being motivated for going to work.
Thank you. Very well said. Thank you. If personal hygiene was as critical as organizational hygiene, things would be very different. Totally said. Thank you. Yes.
You know, when Shalini called me, I was really happy to hear what she said this was about, this whole summit was about, and who was coming together in the summit. It was not just another slew of corporates and organizations that came together. It was organizations, it was NGOs, it was academicians, and this is the right blend of people to have this conversation with, because that's where we need to start. It saddens me every time I go to have a learning conversation with a leader anywhere. They have a list of trainings that they approach us with usually. They have a list of trainings. This is what I want. I want so-and-so people to attend these trainings. They have the names also mapped out for which training. Have these folks been consulted? I assure you not. They don't even know that these grand learning plans are being made for them. They have no clue. One fine day, an invite lands in their inbox, and they write back saying, hey, what's this about? And I have this inglorious pleasure of saying, your manager has planned for your development. Yay, be excited, right? Well, no. I think we need to all take a pause, take a step back, and think about, why do you even want to learn? Forget what you want to learn. We start at, as the panelists very rightly pointed out, it's about doing. It's about today, this is my job. These are the technical skills that my job requires. Therefore, let me learn it. If I don't have it, I don't need it for the next 1 year. I'll learn it after 1 year. This is the approach we take to learning, which is very, very sad. Because we've been told and conditioned to think of learning as another training in a classroom. We've been conditioned to think of learning as an online learning. Today, I know our millennials look at YouTube videos, and there are so many apps that help you to learn. Fantastic, but it's still all, today is the time to learn, because tomorrow I need a particular skill. There isn't a way of looking at my life holistically and saying, this is who I am today. This is who I would like to be in 1 year, or 2 years, or 3 years. And therefore, how would I like to learn? Do I want to backpack to another country and learn from the people that I meet there? Do I want to sit in a classroom and listen to someone talk about the slides they have behind their backs? Do I want to go through an experience of learning, or do I want to be told that here is a theory, here is a framework, follow step 1, 2, 3, 4, you're sorted? it is really, really unfortunate that more and more people are joining this herd. But you know what? There's good news. There is a silver lining after all. The good news is that the younger generation, the younger folks who are joining our organizations today are challenging the status quo. They're not happy with it. They don't accept it. They push us, they question us, they refuse to accept anything you put in front of them unless it's making sense. And I would like more and more of those people to do that, to challenge us, to push us, because I think somewhere even learning teams have gotten a little comfortable in the status quo. We've gotten comfortable because there is a certain frame that I just need to follow this frame. I can just patch this. I hear so many organizations talk about what do we already have so we don't have to create? What can we just take and run with so we're not reinventing the wheel? When did we get to that place? It's time to stop. As learners and as learning professionals, it's time to stop and look at why you're doing what you're doing. My favorite question. All my colleagues hate me for this question. Why? I ask it all the time. Please ask why. If you're going for a learning experience, ask why you're going for it. For yourself, not for your team, not for your organization, not for the technology that you're going to be working on tomorrow, but why do you want it? And I'll stop.
Sure, thank you. And something that you said, which is, today in our workplaces, our bosses sometimes decide what we should learn. And before this, actually, Kiran spoke about how, we are working in school systems where teachers or, the system is deciding what a child should learn. So it almost like we grow up and return the favor. And I think that's an interesting connection. Yesterday, when Punya, was speaking, he said every child needs 3 things. So the 3 things that he said every child needs is mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Excellent. And purpose. So those are the 3 things that he spoke about. And I think when Punya spoke that, I think something that came to me is, but maybe that's not just for children. That's for adults, that's for organizations too. So my next question, and I'll start with you, Santosh, is how do organizations create mastery, autonomy, purpose in their organizations for their people?
Okay. So I must tell first that I got into this field not because I felt this is my purpose. I felt it is needed for me, learning. And I also believe that a lot of us get into certain subjects to teach because we need it. So that's my first conception. I felt that I got to do something about me, and I need to learn, and that took me here in that way. While the word mastery is extremely popular in organizations because they can connect that with competency. So one of the things first I learned, it was a culture shock for me to get, my heroes were Paulo Freire, Pablo Neruda, and Anais Nin before I jumped into the boardroom. And before Bill Gates and Steve Jobs took that place. They didn't replace the other ones though. There was more. And one of my great thing about management, and the challenge is the world, we love in specialization. The problem with the specialization is that the doctor who is checking your liver has no clue about your heart. I'm an expert on this. So organizations love expertise. So mastery, they love it because I'm master of something. And because I'm master of this, I have no clue about that, and which was really challenging for me. And when I looked at it, that's where the management theory came up. I always ask my group, any idea who is known as the father of modern management, if you want to look at organizations? Any wild guess? That's right. And some people go even beyond that. This was a guy called Frederick Taylor, who most people don't know, but he came up with this theory of time and motion study. How do you reduce time and move things faster? So it's all about efficiency. So they loved mastery. So there is a lot of focus on mastery. Purpose, which is my growth journey has been years and years I spent with organizations and people helping them to find their purpose, that I've found that that's useless. Because that means there is a purpose up there. And I'm trying to find that. And I now know there is no purpose. Actually, that's quite shocking. You choose. You say this is my purpose, then that become your purpose. There's no point in, it's like that. Rumi has done a lot of damage to people, because people take his quotes and so I always used to say that, please don't search for your soulmate, search for your soul, dear mate. So there is a concept, it's up there. And I'm trying to search and find. What if it's not there, it's your choice. I choose this is my purpose, so that becomes my purpose. So a lot of the stuff that I do in organizations say that life has no meaning, but you have a choice to give the meaning. And that becomes your purpose.
Sure. Yeah. And Santosh, I'm going to insist that you tell us the story that, you often tell people when you quote Frederick Taylor, which is, he puts the people in a room and he observes something. So can you please tell us that story?
Put people in a room and...
and people perform in a certain way when they're being observed.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So.
There are only two great theories in management. After that, it's all recycled. So this is one. You can keep doing this. This is an experiment where they gave multiple tasks to a bunch of people. They reduced, while they were performing the task, they reduced the AC, they increased the AC, they had a lot of sounds, they reduced the sounds. They were planning to basically study how these external disturbances influence people's productivity, and whatever they did, productivity increased. And they were puzzled, oh my God. We put too much noise, productivity still increased. We reduced the noise, productivity increased. Finally, they learned the fact that they were being involved in something meaningful and people are observing them keenly was only the requirement for productivity to go up. Wow, that's a great thing. And I take this connecting to specialization. Because of specialization, that what's happening is, in organization now there is a vertical where they look at engagement. So they're all the time bothering about how do I increase engagement. And I always say that you bring engagement by engaging people in meaningful conversation, not by celebrating birthdays with balloons in the cafeteria. Then that becomes an engagement activity. And people, when they are involved in what is meaningful for them, that increases engagement in organizations. Yeah.
Right. And I think that goes back again to this morning what Kiran said, that do we really have the stamina for conversations and relationships versus cutting cakes and putting balloons up, perhaps. So great. Manisha.
On mic.
You're a learner. You're learning. So, I'm just going to take up from where you stopped, right? About when you have to learn, ask the why. Why are we learning? And what I have learned is that learning is deeply connected to the vision that we build for ourselves. The purpose is not out there. There's a calling within. I wanted to answer your story with that, answer your question with a story. And can we pull up that picture if possible? Okay. So here is Kantabai. Any guesses who Kantabai could be? Just words? Entrepreneur, yeah. Sarpanch?
Farmer.
Right. Kantabai is the board member of one of India's largest tribal banks for women. And I just want to share a story. So Kantabai, 20 years ago, was a daily wage laborer, and she would earn 40 rupees every day, selling sweets. And outside the railway station of Mahaswad, which is notorious for sort of being drought prone for the last 10 years. And she got into a conversation with a social entrepreneur whose name is Chetna Gala Sinha, who's now a very well-known rural. She's a feminist banker. And Kantabai told Chetna one thing. She said, so Chetna had gone and told her, like sort of many of us in the social development sector, what is it that you want that will change your life? And Kantabai told her, I want a bank account. Because that will change my life. So she said, well, you're earning 20 rupees, 40 rupees every day. How do you need, you need a bank account? Are you sure? She said, yes, I need a bank account. Because she wanted to save 200 rupees so that she could buy a rubber plastic sheet to cover, to protect herself and her child during the rains. So they went from bank to bank. Banks didn't allow Kantabai to step in. So Kantabai told Chetna, let's create a bank of our own. So Chetna said, yes, let's do that, right? And after, I'm just going to, just bear with me, after 2 years of mobilizing 200 Kantabais, who were all earning, 40 rupees a day, that group actually mobilized 9 lakh rupees to start a bank. So then they went and they sort of got the application form for the bank, filled out all the details. It's not easy to apply for a bank. It's harder than sort of, launching a trust. And the RBI Bombay chief called Chetna and said, very, very audacious and fantastic and very good. But, of the 14 board members, there is one signature and there are 13 thumbprints. So surely, I can't give you the bank account license. So Chetna was totally devastated that day, completely devastated. And she went back to Kantabai and her team and her group and cried a lot. But Kantabai actually, sort of after she had cried, after she had stopped crying, told Chetna, done? Are you done? She said, done, matlab, we are finished. She said, you're finished? You may be finished, I am not, we are not. Tell us, what do we have to learn to get that bank account going? They said, you have to learn banking, principal amount, interest amount. First of all, you have to learn how reading, writing, everything. She said, give us 3 months and we'll do it. In 3 months, they went and reapplied for the bank account. This time, Kantabai went with Chetna. Kantabai and her entire group of 14 women went with Chetna. They entered the RBI Bombay office and they told all the Bombay office people that, you ask us all the questions to see if we are learned enough to run a bank. But what you should do is ask us all the questions and ask us to calculate the principal amount of any amount. And we are going to challenge your managers to answer the same questions without a calculator. Right? And from there, the conversations went on for 2 hours. And by the end of the discussion, they actually launched a bank. They got the RBI permission. This bank was the model on which the Bharatiya Mahila Bank of the Government of India was set up. So my question is, in terms of autonomy, purpose, and meaning? Mastery. Okay. So where did Kantabai get that from is a question that, I have kind of like wrapped my head around. Where do they get it from? And, age, therefore, is no barrier to, talent, or age does not define potential. And so where does that come from?
So, David.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I believe part of the answer could be in that there were no organizational structures that were hindering her in living up to that and like having the space to be autonomous and work on what was purposeful. So like my take is then, how do you then ensure that you have the same type of structures within organizations so you don't limit yourself and your employees in fulfilling their full potential in delivering the work that you do? And you both talked about this thing about actually being a part of what kind of training would be relevant for me, and you told about like we want to engage in meaningful conversations rather than celebrations. And today we talk about solutions. So I also want to give you a short example of one take on a solution of how do you then do that? because I meet a lot of leaders that then, if we have to talk about our organizational processes and listen to our employees and have these conversations, like, we don't have time for that. It's a good idea, but we don't have the time. And my take on that is that you don't have to sit in a room together all the time for days and days, but you need to stop up and set some structures for that and find the right frames for that and invite your employees into giving ideas for how could we set those structures. Because that will essentially mean that you can accelerate the work you're doing, because it will take away some frustration. And I'll get back to that in the example. And I think the core of this example is to set an invitation. It's not just to gathering people, but setting an invitation and prioritizing this as a leader, saying, we want to talk about these things and we want to involve you in that process. And we're willing to listen to each and every one of you. So this was actually a project from the CARES pilots. I was a co-student of mine, and one of my teammates started this project with a local hospital in Aarhus, just a few kilometers from the CARES pilot school. It's a hospital with 12,000 employees. Most of them are doctors. And they figured that they were really, really stuck in actually delivering good services. I mean, the patients were not satisfied with what they got. They got perfect knees. That was not the problem. But all the things around that experience of going through a surgery or being hospitalized, what that takes from the patient and their families can be quite intense and stressful. So their employees were simply stressed out and not happy. So what can we do about that? So we started a project across the whole hospital focusing on young doctors and seeing how can we involve them talking about the way we organize the work that we do. They, young doctors, perceive themselves as being experts. They're really good at taking care of your liver, and they're really good at making sure that your knee is all right after the surgery. So that's the core of their work, and of course that needs to be the core of their work. So we're not in for changing that. But we want to make sure that everything that's around that knee also gets some attention. And that these young doctors actually also want to ensure what is the good way of communicating with people around the patient and with the patient. What is the good way of collaborating with my colleagues, with the nurses and analytics and so on. And how do we structure just a daily working day? Like, how do we have our morning conferences? How do we walk around to meet all the patients? And how do we not get stressed out from that? And in that, there's a lot of organization, and there's actually also quite a lot of leadership. But we experience that these young doctors only see themselves as professionals within a certain field. And they don't see themselves as leaders or organizational developers. Because they have no experience, and most of all, they have no language and no invitation from top management. So what happened was that the top leadership of this organization committed to saying, we want you to invite you into this conversation and also give you some autonomy in finding the solution. So we brought in 6 CARES pilot students that came in to disrupt a bit and just meet these doctors and have conversations with them around organization and leadership. So there were no additional trainings. No surgeries were canceled and taken away. We had this idea like we have to meet in a fancy hotel to have these conversations. They were at their workplace. And they just got a few people coming in to ask them questions. Said, so that's a problem. That is a hindering your daily life. What could be done about that? What could you do about it? How could you support that we could do something about it? What conversations need to take place between you, your colleagues, and your leaders in order to take care of this? Do you think your leader knows that this is a problem? How can you make your leader aware of this? And how can you ensure that it actually becomes easy for your leader to lead you? And suddenly, a whole level of conversation opened up. And what happened at the different departments of the hospital was the most powerful thing that I didn't realize in the beginning, actually. And what I learned was that it was the relationship between the young doctors at the hospital and their local management. Suddenly, they were allowed to have conversations that before were not allowed, because they understood they were in a hierarchical organization. You have 30 years of experience as a doctor. Who am I to question the way we do things here? But they were like, no, I'm the leader. I became a leader 5 years ago. I know how to manage, but I'm a doctor, but I don't see all these things. You're the one meeting the patients. I need that kind of feedback. And when we talk about organization and leadership, I'm all ears, so come and tell me. And slowly, that developed, and now we see across that hospital, 3 years ago, that they have a new way of communicating with each other and a new way of finding solutions locally. Yeah, I think that was the time, so I want to end it there.
What I heard, as you said that, David, something that came to my mind is something that I read a long time back, which is, organizations always make time for what's urgent, but they may not make time for what's important. And I think that's what I heard as you said the whole thing. So.
That's a long-term investment of how we run this organization, yeah. And what we see is that there was so much stress on these doctors, and they actually took that home. So the frustration was still there. They just complained to their husband or wife, like, I have a bad leader, I don't have time. And they didn't felt any autonomy in or drive in that they could be a part of that solution. And suddenly, they saw the purpose in what they were doing, and they could be a driver for change.
Sure, thank you. Kapila, mastery, autonomy, and purpose.
There's so much to learn from failures, isn't it? One of the organizations I worked in, we realized that we put our leaders on a pedestal, we keep showing them up for greatness, we keep getting them in front of these groups of people to talk about how amazing they are and they've accomplished so much. And I see this pattern repeated in pretty much every other organization that I've worked in. And in one of these companies, we thought we'll test and do something different and put these leaders on a hot seat to speak. We said, you're going to make yourself the most vulnerable you've probably been ever. We're going to get you in front of, well, as many people as would like to turn up from this organization of about, I think, 3,000 people. And you're going to say how you really dropped the ball in your career, how you really messed things up. It might be your work, it might be personal, it could be anything, but there is no hiding behind the politically correct mistakes. There is no, the nice mistake where you still emerge the hero. It is a mistake where you really, really screwed it up. And you did not recover the error that you made there, but what did you learn? What did you come out with? You can imagine what happened when we took it to the leaders. They did not want to do it, obviously, because no one has ever made themselves that vulnerable and showed themselves up like that in front of anyone, leave alone the entire organization. We were going to record it, by the way, and put it on our put it on our organizational networks for everyone to see and hear. A lot of back and forth. We eventually got them to a point. They brought the diplomatic errors. They brought the politically correct mistakes. Sure, we sent them back. We said, come back with more, come back with something else. And we got them in front of a group with the right content eventually. And that content was their life for the world to see. And how amazing was that? How amazing was it for the people to see that they're not infallible? They make mistakes too. They have really messed it up. It's okay that I make mistakes too, and to learn from them. And now my leaders will tell me how to get over those points, because some of those are really low points when you make that mistake. Just the other day, a colleague came to me and said, GDPR was just launched and I sent the wrong email to the wrong person. And she was down in the pits about it. It's okay. Fix the mistake and learn how you're going to get over it, but your mistakes are what make you great. I have this amazing mentor. I love that person. I was having one of those days. I went to him and I was whining and cribbing about the world and how everybody's out to get me, you can imagine. And he just sat there. For the longest time, he let me go on and on. He didn't say a word. He just listened to me. And, well, it starts to get uncomfortable when people are not feeding into all of this, isn't it? So I looked at him to say something. He said, well, if this is all life is thrown at you, he said, you're really lucky. You're really fortunate. And then he said, oh, wait a minute, no. That is the most unfortunate thing to happen to you. If life is not throwing bigger and badder challenges at you, you're never going to get, well, the words are mastery, autonomy, and purpose today, but that's what he was throwing back at me. He said, you're never going to get it, you're never going to grow, you're never going to... He said, think of the person you want to be when you're 50 and 60 years old. He said, you'll never be that if life is easy and smooth and happy for you all the time. Yeah.
What I hear is one of the ways perhaps for organizations to create that kind of an environment is creating a place where people can make mistakes and more importantly speak about failure, especially where leadership can be vulnerable. I want to get the mic to Punya because I want to hear from Punya. Punya, you spoke about mastery, autonomy and purpose. I'm curious, how do you create that in your own team, people you work with, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Thank you. So one of the things that I was listening to, I was sort of online and looking up definitions of what learning is. And one of the definitions that people give is relatively permanent change in a person's knowledge or behavior due to experience. And I think that if you think of an organization, it's made up of people, right? And so I don't get what it means for an organization to learn. And when I think about that, it means that the individuals within it have to self-organize, structure in such a way that whatever is happening, that collectively they are doing something differently, right? That's what learning is. And that's where I think individual motivation becomes key, and that's where I think the motivational literature that I read allowed me to sort of think about this, that is an individual who is there. So one of the conversations I have with everybody who sort of works with me is, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? And I hope the answer is not here, right? You see yourself somewhere else. And then the question is, how can this process be something that's useful to you, to wherever you want to end up being? Right, so that's the act of mastery. You're getting better at something in order for some purpose, right? What's the bigger purpose of why are we here, right? And autonomy is like, life can never be fully autonomous. There always are going to be constraints on you, me, everybody. But within that, can we have some relative autonomy that you choose how to do things, so on. And one of the biggest things is that, and I was talking this morning with you, is, so we have this, so I threw something up called Principles. We are the Office of Scholarship and Innovation, and so we call ourselves OOFC. And OOFC is because we keep making mistakes all the time. We make so many mistakes that we can't even spell oopsie correctly, right? So that's why we are OOFC. We always screw up. That's what we do, right? So coming back to this failure and learning. And we threw some principles together, and then we had a retreat, and we went through them, and we revised it. So now we are at version 3.0 of this. Those are our internal sort of values and rules that we will collectively sort of follow. And so at one point, somebody said, oh, we should print them up and put them on the wall. And I said, absolutely not. Because we will revisit them again 6 months from now. And it will become 4.0 because we will have changed. We will be a different group of people. Some people will leave, new people will come in. Our ways of thinking will evolve. But it's that thing, I think, that David, you talked about, which is that you have to keep doing this. It is an ongoing thing. It's a John Cleese quote I had yesterday, which is, creativity is not a way of, it's a way of life. So as a group of people engaging in this conversation, listening becomes like a really crucial part of it. So one last thing I'll say is, I was listening to this podcast, which, what's his name, Reid Hoffman does on Masters of Scale, the LinkedIn connection there. So he was speaking, I'm forgetting who, the guy who invented Ethernet or somebody. And so his company got bought up by somebody else. I mean, he was thrown out as CEO and somebody else became CEO, but he's still in the company. And he was really angry at this guy. He's like, he's taken over my job. And the first meeting happens, he sees this guy's writing all kinds of stuff down. So he sneaks out at the back to see what this guy's been writing. And all he has been writing in this acronym, which is DNT, DNT, DNT. So he asked him later, what is this DNT? He said, do not talk. So the urge by the leadership to talk a lot is very powerful. The finger wagging, like, this is what we are, this is who we are. So he said, I have to keep writing and telling myself, do not talk, do not talk, do not talk, so that I listen. And I think that's also sort of a big part. I mean, it's an ongoing, continuous thing. At the end of the day, what was said in the morning, it is people. It is the smile, it is the humor, it is the respect. That's going to make the culture, that's what's going to make that whole thing work. And unless we keep that in mind, I think nothing else is going to work. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Organizations and leaders who know how to listen, that's definitely there. I'm going to just close this and, maybe we could start from you and move across the other side of the panel. And do you have a closing message or a call to action to all the organization and institution leaders and managers who are here in this room right now?
From all my conversations in the past decade, I'll come from there. From every meeting with a leader, from every conversation with employees, individuals, needs and what I want to do, and conflicting messages from all of those places, I'm at a point where I truly believe that we need to relook learning completely. Learning, just to go on the question that you just asked, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but as we scale, you're right, there is somewhere we start to, we have these mass-produced solutions for problems that come our way, etc. But I think it's time to get off our seats and say, I will still bring uniqueness by creating experiences, not programs. And that would be my call to action to every learning professional, every leader in this room, that you go back and look at how you're going to create experiences for your people, whether it's a visit to a museum when you want to teach them about cultural adaptation, whether you want to bring you want to do a music lesson to teach growth mindset, whether you want to do assessments to help people understand personality. There is no dearth for what you could go back and do, but please ensure that my request, humble request to you, is that make it an experience for people. Their learning begins there. That's it. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what I'll leave you with is, if you want to create a learning organization, you need to create a culture of trust and open dialogue. And in order to do so, you need to prioritize that as a strategic milestone next to all the other strategic external milestones that you have, and say, we want to prioritize this conversation. And as an invitation to the leaders, ask for help from your network or from your employees to figure out what kind of conversations needs to happen and how could we set a good structure for that. And for the employees in the room, a recommendation to help your leader in this, kindly request or suggest an idea of how you can have these conversations about knowledge sharing, organizational processes, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Manisha.
So for me, I'm going to draw from what Punya had said yesterday, that we create who we are. So if leaders can, by identity, take on the identity of learners, the learning organizations will get created. Most leaders, if you sort of really speak to them, they'll tell you they are not doing what they learned to do. So, Poonam's entry into education was by accident, right? I don't know how many of you studied and you're doing what you studied, right? So most people, most leaders are not doing what they learned in universities. So how did they set up organizations? They were creative, they were playful, they took on experiments, they became self-learners. So I think the call for all of us is to dump this entire, sort of crown label identity of leader and really become learners. And I think we all just need to, forget leadership and just live creative lives. And I think everything will take care of itself.
Thank you.
So I think other than this gray beard that started happening in the last 1 year that makes me look wise, I don't have much, from my own learning perspective to share a call for action kind of a wisdom. So I'm going to borrow it from here and there. I also feel this, while this looks wise, some are wise and some are otherwise, and I'm on the other side. One that I like is, after a paradigm shift, nothing changes in the world, but the scientist is now going to work in the new world. after a paradigm shift, nothing changes in the outside world. But the scientist who discovered is going to work in the new world. So that's important to me. So I'm not going to measure and look at, because that's one. And it goes well with my other favorite one, is, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, and after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. But maybe with a little bit more awareness. And the last is from me. These two are not mine. I think we need to redefine what we call leadership, and here is my simple one. Leadership is about creating a new possibility that's not the extension of your past. Period. Edison did not create an electric bulb by improving the candle. That was a new possibility. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us in 2018 Quest to Learn Summit. I think a lot of you have traveled from far away and joined us over the last 2 days, and some of you this morning. Big round of applause for all of them once again, please.